quite familiar with. On the other hand, there's plenty of opportunities. We should bear in mind that the country has become much more civilized in the past 50 or 60 years. A meeting like this could not have been conceivable in 1960, 1970. The kinds of commitment and engagement that you and many others like you are committed to is something quite new. And there have been many advances and achievements. Women's rights, civil rights generally, rights of gays, opposition to aggression, environmental concerns didn't even exist at that time. There's been tremendous progress. That means that struggles today start from a much higher plane than they did not many years ago. At the time when Harry was marching in Selma, it was a much harsher world than it is today. The reason is that plenty of people did commit themselves to constant, dedicated struggle, and there were plenty of achievements. And that goes back in American history. No need to review it, but the earlier period is one of total horror. I mean, after all, the country was founded on two incredible crimes, unbelievable crimes. One, virtual extermination of the indigenous population. It's kind of a migrant crisis of the kind we don't think about today. And a form of slavery which was the most vicious in history and is in fact the basis for a large part of the wealth and economic development of the United States, England, France, and others. That's history. When Donald Trump talks about making the country great again, for many people, it wasn't that great, quite the opposite. It was, but the point is, there has been plenty of progress because people facing much harsher conditions than we do didn't give up. That's an important lesson. Furthermore, even the election itself suggests major opportunities. For one thing, as you know, the Democrats actually had a considerable majority of the vote. And if you look at the younger voters, the people who will shape the future, they were overwhelmingly anti-Trump and even more overwhelmingly pro-Sanders. That's an we should also bear in mind what a remarkable phenomenon the Sanders campaign was. I mean, here's somebody unknown, came from nowhere, practically no one in the country knew who he was. He was using words like socialism, which used to be a real curse word, no corporate support, no media support, no support from the wealthy, everything that has always been crucial to winning elections. Mostly we have bought elections. Had none of it, and practically took over one of the two major parties. It could have taken it over if it hadn't been for shenanigans you know about. And it was primarily driven by young people. All of these are very hopeful signs. It means there are plenty of things that can be done. There are opportunities that can be grasped. No time to run through them, but there are plenty of them. And it's really very much in our hands, and among the younger of you, in your hands, to carry us forward in this long path, long, arduous path towards trying to create a civilized society and a decent world.
There's been a lot of discussion in recent weeks about the role of workers, of the working class in this election, of Trump's supposed appeal to white workers. And Harry, you know that the civil rights movement, as it was growing and developing, needed and was fueled as well by progressive unions like 1199 and the auto workers and others that gave it strength and organization and resources. I'm wondering how you're looking at this issue, because Noam, as you mentioned, all the young people, the problem is that the young people, the so-called creative classes, are increasingly concentrating in the big cities. They're in Seattle, and they're in Chicago, and they're in New York, and then the issue then is what happens in the rest of the country. You know, back in the 60s and 70s, we used to say, you got to go back out and organize, organize in the communities from which you came from. How do you see this whole analysis of the, quote, loss of the working class to sort of progressive politics that we're hearing in the commercial and the corporate press?
Well, take a look again at the last few elections. Many of the Trump voters among the white working class voted for Obama. They were deluded by the slogans of the campaign. You may recall that the 2008 campaign was based on the slogan, "Hope and Change." Well, many people voted rightly for hope and change. The working class has suffered, not disastrously, but severely from the neoliberal policies of the past generation, pretty much from 1979. So if you look, say, just take the 2007, the peak of what economists were calling the economic miracle, right before the crash. 2007, American workers had real wages lower, considerably lower than in 1979, before these policies were instituted. They lost, listen to Alan Greenspan, who during the height of the euphoria over the economy was called St. Alan, the greatest economist of all time. He testified to Congress explaining the basis for the success of the economy that he was running. He said it was based on growing worker insecurity. Growing worker insecurity, meaning if workers are beaten down enough and intimidated enough, and if their organizations, their unions are sufficiently destroyed that they can't ask for higher wages and for decent benefits, then it's good for the economy. Creates a healthy economy by some measure. We know the measure. Well, all of this has happened, and the working class has suffered from it. They had a real need for hope and change. Well, they didn't get hope and they didn't get change. I don't usually agree with Sarah Palin, but I think she nailed it when she asked at one point, where's all this hopey, changey business? Well, there wasn't any. So no hope, no change. Already, it showed very quickly in midterm and future elections. This election, a con man came along and is offering hope and change, and they're voting for it. Suppose that people like you, the people who formed the Sanders movement, would present an authentic, constructive program for real hope and change. It would win these people back. I think many of the Trump voters Trump voters could have voted for Sanders if there had been the right kind of activism and organization. And those are possibilities. It's been done in the past under much harsher circumstances. Organizing white working people in Indiana is a lot easier than what the Freedom Riders tried to do in the South 60 years ago. Much easier. Takes work, but it can be done. And my feeling is that a core part of a progressive program is to rebuild the organized structure of the labor movement, which all throughout modern history has been in the forefront of progressive change. And that's not impossible either. It's been beaten down pretty severely in the past generation, but it's been worse before. If you go back to the 1920s, a period which is not unlike today in many ways, the Gilded Age, the labor movement was virtually destroyed. Woodrow Wilson's Red Scare practically wiped it out. There had been a militant activist labor movement. There was almost nothing left of it in the 1920s. By the 1930s, it revived. Militant labor action, organization of the CIO,